It's my pleasure to kind of welcome you to the second panel. I think I have a great group of very diverse kind of backgrounds here. So one, obviously, you met Rohini before. Secondly, I think we have Tabitha Morton. She's with UN Women, leads UN Women UK. Then we have Felicitas, who's the head of diversity at SumUp. Lucy Davis, MBA 2010, fellow MBA classmate, but also obviously at Google, worked on and the ethics of AI, responsible AI. Then we have Meera Shah, who's at the Shell Foundation, working on smallholder farmers, but I think all of them have their personal stories around care. So the topic today is around, as we work on, as at Dharma Life, work on women's economic empowerment or women's economic power, as we cannot really call it empowerment anymore. I think it's more economic power. I think empowerment is very preachy or, entitled. So I prefer to call it women's economic power. So we work on that in India. But the issue is a global one, right? And I think one of the key points to make here, I think we always talk about, kind of skills, training, kind of job creation, entrepreneurship. But, one of the key challenges which holds back women is the care challenge. And the care challenge, I think we have we have a lot of experts on this panel, so I'll leave the definition and perspectives to them. But I think usually the common knowledge is that providing care, women drop out of the workforce at two points in their career. One is during the childcare phase, and second is, which is not really that commonly talked about, during the time of elderly care requirements. And so it's called the sandwich. Both sides are when dropouts happen. And providing care support, or let's say role changes that men should be playing their part in this. As the only male member on this panel, I think it's kind of something which I should mention, and we should all acknowledge that there's an equal responsibility. And I think there's obviously a lot of behavior change work going on to kind of move people into that direction, men in that direction. But apart from that, obviously, is what are the support options available, whether it's from the corporate side, whether it's from the government side. I think it's a very obvious statement that care support should be provided, but the costs of that, who covers it, how is the balance in the family maintained? Are there risks of gender-based violence around that time, which is quite common? I think Tabitha will talk about that. And so these are all open questions, and this is very much a global challenge. I think we will hear different countries' perspectives. And so I'll start first with asking everyone, I think, in a sequence to talk about their personal perspectives on this issue, and generally, I think, their corporate and professional perspectives. So let me start with Tabitha.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me? Good stuff. Well, thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you so much for all of the work that you do with us in India as well. I'll talk about that a little bit in a moment. But why should we care about care? And it is really interesting we have a panel of women talking about care as well. I think the more men that talk about care and the more men understand and feel that this is part of the inequalities that they face in life as well, the better. Because we're not talking about a charitable act here. We're not just talking about being nice to women. We're talking about basic human rights. Human rights to be able to make choices. Human rights to be able to be economically empowered, to escape violence, and to also build a different future. Because if we don't address the care imbalances, we're raising children that see mum does this and dad does this. Even in same-sex relationships, we see that as well. One person takes over more responsibility than the other. But let's pull back to sort of where we are. We've just released the gender snapshot, which is the once-a-year data points that UN Women say, like, this is how far we are from gender equality. Spoiler alert, we're a way off. But you have to break down. People often say to me, why do you care so much about care? And I said, well, I care about ending violence. I care about ending poverty. And I see care as a driver for that. It's going to be 137 years before we end poverty for all women. 137 years. Every 12 minutes in the world today, a woman dies from gendered violence. So what have those two things got to do with childcare? Well, if we're not economically empowering families and women to be able to make decisions about how they earn their money, we're not going to end poverty. And if we're not economically empowering women, we are trapping them in relationships where they can't escape the violence from them, and they can't rebuild their lives when they do escape that violence as well. So care is so, so important. And all too often, we look to other countries. We maybe look to rural women in India as someone who's grown up in the UK and go, oh, that's, you know, it's really tough there. No, right now in the UK, we released some research just a month ago that says 25%, 1 in 4 women in the workforce in the UK are unwillingly leaving their jobs because of the cost and burden of care. And this was not just early education. This was also looking after teenagers, as well as elderly parents and relatives. So the care burden, and also the joy, because let's face it, these, you know, children and our parents, they're joys as well. But that responsibility sits on women firmly. And what we want to do at UN Women is to change the narrative, because all too often it is, how does governments pay for this? How are private sector going to pay for this? And we said, actually, if you looked at the care economy as society's engine room, you start to change your perspectives. You start to think about creating jobs in care. You start to creating jobs in communities. And if you change that, in the UK, there was some analysis done on this. And if you invest, this is in the UK, if you invest in care, so that's childcare and elderly care, and we're talking quality jobs with quality salaries and career progression, you get twice the return on investment that you do if you've invested in infrastructure. Now, of course, we need to invest in infrastructure. I'm not against roads, I'm not against buildings, but it's almost a, you know, you often see as governments come in, they think, okay, big investment, infrastructure investments that will help the economy. People don't think about that in the care. So I know we're going to talk later on about some of the ideas that we've got for that, but I just wanted to bring you right back up to that. 137 years before we end poverty, every 12 minutes, a woman dies across the world. And women are doing 2.5 times the unpaid care that men do across the world. So for every day a man works, a woman is working that day and 2.5 times more. So that's the burden. And for me, it is the quickest way to gender equality, because our next generation will grow up, if we rebalance care, seeing that care is something that is worthy as a career for themselves and something they should share if they're in a same-sex relationship as well. So I think that this is like unlocks so much stuff around gender equality. But I'd like to hand back to you now.
Thank you, Roberta. So just, I think, building on that, I think the stats are obviously stark. This was the UK perspective. The global numbers are, I think, are even more extreme, I think. So in India, we'll come to that. I think India challenge, it obviously depends a bit on the population age, right? In terms of, I think, the burden difference between elderly care and childcare. It also depends, on kind of the systems and government structures for that. But there's a big, let me come next to the corporate responsibility here and that perspective. So I'll come to you, Felicitas, next. If you could introduce yourself and also talk about your perspective, both as part of different organizations, right now as part of SumUp, but also I think you worked previously in larger corporations. So if you could share your perspectives on this.
Mm-hmm, super. Thank you for having me. And it's great to be here. And after what you have said, I was wondering what else can I say, because you really have covered it fantastically. I work at SumUp as, you can hear me, by the way, also, just to double check? Okay. We are like about 3,000 people, so the benefit of it is actually that we can reach pretty much everybody. When we speak, for example, about domestic violence and abuse or gender inequalities, racism, we do speak about neurodiversity and all different kind of types of dimensions, let's say, in the D&I world. But I did work at a big, large corporate telecommunication company, Vodafone, before. I think there is like a differentiation you have to make, right? Also in which countries you are based. So globally, there's such a big difference. There are only a few countries actually that have really managed it really well, like in the north, like Sweden, for example, right? There are some great examples of how it can be done. At the same time, and you mentioned India before, you also referred to it, and with UK, there was actually, some time ago, a Grant Thornton study that showed that I think India and Germany are quite similar. Looking at the female share representation in top management positions. So we have plenty of work to do here. Of course, globally we can take an approach, but yeah, plenty of work to do also in Europe and in our biases and stereotypes, but this we come to later. So I think depending on where you live, the statutory requirements, of course, offer parents some certain benefits, which are pretty limited, I would say, globally, but then of course corporations do have measures to take. So at Vodafone back then, I mentioned that because sum up, we are pretty small. We are still need to improve there as well. But what we have done back then there is research with KPMG, like about a decade ago or so, identifying 96 million women that were back then currently on a career break. 96 million, which is like really incredible, a fantastic, tremendous pool of talents that is still untapped. And also research shows that it's very difficult for women to get back into the career, or even people, right, men and women, after a career break. So I think there's something, again, for the ideas later, what we can do there, we will speak about it. What also some corporates do is really offering paid parental leave. And what is really important here, that is parental, right? It's not only women like maternity, but also paternity, or of course being inclusive to the LGBTQ plus community. A care for all carers, both also non-birthing parents or carers. And that's so important because I think some companies offer 16 weeks, sometimes 18 weeks, 20, or even some more. But I think the really relevant part is that it's both in hetero relationships, men and women, that can then take parental leave and can be out of the job also for then that amount of time. Really also because if we look at, for example, promotions or hiring decisions, still often we're so biased that we potentially prefer a man maybe to be hired for a role because maybe a woman at a certain age can drop out. So it's really important to focus on that, and also really put in the man in the responsibility for the care, as we said before. So I think there are a few relevant things to consider here. Having said that, it's great to have those policies if they're not lived, right? So, and I think still today, many, depending on the societies we live in, also on how our own upbringing was, even though you might have great policies in our corporations, often they are not lived in the right way, let's say, right, where we actually people benefit from those policies. So to sum up, what we try to do, again, we don't have a global parental policy yet, but we really encourage men and women to take the break, to take care of families, and also we have the people positivity kind of lens. So we trust our people and allow flexibility in case they need to come, late to work or leave early to pick up maybe the children or take care of their parents, or have other, doctor's appointment, personal needs they need to pursue. I think that is really what I really appreciate, right? I know they trust me, and I have the flexibility I need to, manage my work and my life in a really healthy way. So again, we don't have a policy there yet, but I think other lived examples are really beneficial. And one, last but not least, what you mentioned before, why are we doing it, right? I mean, of course, we want to attract and retain the best talents. And I mean, you mentioned also, it's true, I mean, with maternity or caring responsibilities, women drop out. But if we're really honest, also before, right, we have so many biases where women already don't progress and also already drop out. So I did some, back then in the company, some analysis where actually the pipeline is higher, looking at the women and, for like this trainee program. But then even though they no one of them have had children yet, but then, the development, the second step is much lower than their male counterparts. So I think that is something to consider, also to consider looking at our where we live, right? So we often say, but there are so few women in tech, which is true because of our education. Having said that, countries like Bulgaria, for example, looking at the communism they're coming from, right? They have about 40-50% female representation in computer science jobs. So it's possible, and we just need to be honest to ourselves that which homework have we not done, and we really need to do now to fix it, because I think, unfortunately, I want to be more inspiring, motivational, but looking at the gap, I have a little bit a fear that it actually gets even bigger, looking at the future and the importance of technology. And so especially also looking at financial inclusion, right? You have this fantastic professor, I'm a big fan of Linda Gretton, right, who wrote The 100-Year Life. And I think in that book, she refers to about 40% or so, I need to double check, of people born now or some years ago already will become 100 or 105 years old. Now, if our global pension age varies between, I would say, 55 and 70, but, I mean, of course, increasing, but we lived up to over 100 or 105 years old. who's paying for the 30 years of retirement? Maybe then we will, of course, work longer. But I think that is something that we really don't speak enough about, because already now women in retirement age really struggle financially and live in poverty, where actually they, before all their life they weren't. So that is something that really close to my heart also, and that we need to tackle, and that we start speaking about, of course, also at Sum Up.
Thank you, Pritzrasa. I think very wide-ranging, I think, comments, and I'll try to sum them up. But I think we'll come to solutions after again. But here, I think, it's quite stark, the differences, as you said, across the different organizations. And the key question is really, if it's, for me, the question is, it is such an obvious problem that why are we, there's obviously, you said, islands of success in some countries, in some organizations. But why is it not being solved at scale? Because it's such an obvious problem. That's the, I think it's sad in a way. So I think we can at least contribute to some kind of output out of this panel to share. Let me change perspectives a little bit. I'll come to Rohini now. I think she was already introduced, but so I'll go straight into the topic. So, and I'll translate live. So I'm going to ask Rohini about her perspective in her village, and what is the, how this childcare handled there, and what is she doing, what are we doing to solve that. So Rohini जी, आप बताइए थोड़ा आपके गांव में जब महिला काम करना स्टार्ट करती हैं और फैमिली बच्चे आते हैं, बच्चे का टाइम आता है, चाइल्ड केयर का टाइम आता है, तो आपके गांव में क्या होता है?
गांव में तो फर्स्ट प्रायोरिटी बच्चों को ही देनी पड़ती है, और घर में बाकी भी बुजुर्ग लोग रहते हैं, तो सबका ख्याल रखना तो पड़ता ही है। तो बच्चों को बाहर कहीं रख नहीं सकते, इसीलिए कुछ माँ जॉब छोड़ देती है, नहीं तो बच्चे होने तक रुक जाती है, मतलब कुछ सीख नहीं पाती है।
तो आपके गांव में कोई सोल्यूशन है इसका?
हाँ, अभी तो हमने तो फिलहाल सोल्यूशन निकाला है, जैसे कि सामर्थ्य लर्निंग सेंटर है, वो निकाल के हमने छोटे बच्चे भी वहाँ पढ़ने के लिए आते हैं, और उनकी जो माँ है उनको हम अलग अलग कोर्स दे रहे हैं, जैसे कि टेलरिंग का है, ब्यूटी पार्लर का है, एरी वर्क का है, और फार्मिंग के रिलेटेड से भी कोर्स दे रहे हैं।
So I'll just translate. So she says that in her village, obviously, there's not many options for childcare. When women have children, then they drop out of the workforce. They have to also take care of the elders at home. So that responsibility falls on women. She started a program. This is part of one thing we've been working on with the Wheel Institute and UN Women, where she's set up a center where women can come with their children and get trained and also work from there while the children are brought along and they join a preschool. So that's one example of a solution. तो एक और सवाल है आपके लिए. One more question I'll ask her is how the men seeing this. What is the reaction to this? तो जो आदमी गांव के हैं उनका वो क्या बोलते हैं इसके बारे में? अगर मतलब कैसे
पहले तो हमें बहुत कन्विंस करना पड़ा गांव के लोगों को, क्योंकि वो मतलब एक मॉडल ही समझ है कि नहीं, पहले बच्चों को संभालो और फिर तुमको कुछ करना है वो करो, नहीं तो महिलाओं को कमाने की कुछ ज़रूरत नहीं है, 2 टाइम का खाना मिले तो खा जाओ और घर में बैठो, ऐसे ही मेंटेलिटी थी। लेकिन जब से हमने स्टार्ट किया है तब से गांव में थोड़ा बहुत बदलाव आया है।
So she says that the men in the village or the elders in the village did not really accept this, despite the solution being available. But slowly, I think norms change is happening. I think people are accepting it, seeing the examples. But I think that just highlights another point that even if solutions exist, it doesn't really mean they're taken up, because the mental blocks or the social norms present are so difficult to change. So that's the other thing. Thank you, Rohini. Let me, I think there's a lot more. I'll come back to you. I think, so let me now move to Lucy. If you could talk a bit about your perspective on this in terms of both your experience at Google, your personal experience, and how you handled it, and also, I think, the role of technology here.
Yeah, absolutely. Lovely to be here. Thank you, Gaurav, for having me. I think one of the things that I've sort of observed from what's been said so far, and the reason why this seems so important, is that for society to flourish, women need to flourish too. And I think that's at the core of this. This isn't just about fairness or, policy. This is about society flourishing. Women are at the heart of that. So this should matter for everyone. We've heard a lot, some have to talk to us about the importance of like provision and investing in it. The two things that I wanted to focus on that I think are important to help women flourish, and especially working mothers flourish, are around flexibility at work and support at home. Those are sort of two additional things. And obviously my background, as Gaurav alluded to, is in the tech industry. So, the tech optimist side of me definitely thinks that, technology can play a really important role in creating sort of solutions and efficiencies that help humans focus on the things that matter to them. And so in this context, I think that may, that may be, focusing on a career that gives you purpose and economic independence, spending more time with family and having more quality time, those kind of things. So on the good side. And so how does technology and the positives of technology then help with flexibility at work and support at home? Well, I think the flexibility at work, almost all of us have seen, through the pandemic, which expedited everything, is, the ability that technology gives us to kind of, in many jobs, not all jobs, of course, and careers, to connect with people around the world and get our job done in a very kind of fluid, flexible, connected way that is absolutely game-changing in terms of creating more opportunities, giving more people the opportunity to take up those opportunities because there is more bandwidth to be able to manage different things if you can work flexibly and work, using the benefits of technology. I think also, Rohini spoke really articulately in the last session about actually also how technology has been empowering society to kind of create more digital opportunities that brings more women into the workforce, not just working in a different way, but creating new jobs and new opportunities. And that's going to continue to happen. We know that most of the jobs, so many of the jobs that will exist in 20 years do not exist now. And those jobs will be driven and based around technology, AI developments. And those jobs will be much more egalitarian because they are all new skills needed. They're not male skills or entrenched hard skills that certain communities have. They will be much more open for everyone to access. So there is that flexibility that technology provides, both in the terms of what jobs we do and how we do them, that will empower women, I believe, very much so. And I've seen that both across the world and in all different communities. In terms of the supporting side of it, that perhaps we can go into a bit more detail. But like, if you think about how technology supports us at home already on a day-to-day basis, how it helps us, create efficiencies. I just, perhaps obviously maybe more of a Western example, but I just arranged my children's holiday activities using ChatGPT. So, that has saved me hours of planning and organization. So that's helping me as a working mother sort out my life. Again, it's something further down the line, but care bots are coming. They're already testing robots in care homes to look after the elderly, to distribute drugs. So there will be technological solutions to support at home. May sound a bit sci-fi, but of course we're already using the efficiencies, online ordering of food, et cetera, et cetera. We can go into more of that. So that's sort of the technological side of things. But obviously, I don't think any of that replaces the need for the kind of human and governmental support. Indeed, what I would worry about is if, technology puts more expectation on women because we can be more efficient. That's not the solution that I think we want to do, because the kind of flexibility and empowerment that technology gives us gives that to everyone. Technology has allowed men to work more flexibly. I've seen that firsthand, how work patterns in Europe have changed for men who work more from home, spend more time doing the kind of childcare as well as a result. And so I think we really need to kind of remember that the support at home starts with the family and the partnership in place. And I really think that's important. Felicitas talks a lot about how corporate policies and government policies can support that as well, to help women flourish, give men more opportunity to lean into their families. Because in my sort of experience, men really want that. It's becoming, certainly in Europe, there is this big, and I know it's much more difficult to change trends and entrenched behaviors and cultural habits in some parts of the world. But really, I've seen in Europe and America, across my Google colleagues, we've gone from 2 weeks paternity leave in the UK 10 years ago to 6 months paternity leave. And that's been because Google can provide those perks, but it's wanted. Mm-hmm. It's something that to retain the best talent, the best men, not just women, give the paternity leave. So I think really, technology plays a big role, and will be a solution we should lean on to empower us all. But remember that support and flexibility has to be driven at the human level as well.
Thank you, Lucy. So it's also refreshing to see that policy change and how it has happened over the last years. And I think the technology examples you mentioned, they're not very far away. I think you can see that in some of the, Tesla examples where they're testing these things. There's so many examples now of robot use for different things, and even tracking and management. I think probably next 5 years will drastically change the space from that perspective. So thank you for sharing that. Now, let me come to Mira. Mira has a unique perspective, one from a perspective of philanthropy or foundation, corporate foundation, investing into women empowerment of smaller farmers, and the other, and various, obviously, corporate perspectives from Shell. So Mira, let me ask you the same question. What are your thoughts on this topic, your experience, and the journey in this area?
Yeah, thank you, Gaurav, and thank you for having this very important conversation. Let me just start from my personal experience of my first job, which is a mother of 2 boys, a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. And just speaking firsthand, I can only really be here with you here today, and in my other role, my second role as head of smallholder farmers at Shell Foundation, because I have access to affordable care that I trust. And I think that's really important, the word trust, and the fact that my salary can cover the cost of that childcare. I can be here today with you and work because I don't just have one part of that ecosystem. If that link fails and I have to step in, I can, because I have a flexible employer who enabled me to go to the school harvest festival this morning and be here and do a whole ton of other things. I can be here because my husband is part of the conversation and takes a brunt of that childcare. I can be here because my parents pick up my kids every day from school. And so, there's a phrase, it takes a village to raise a child, and I think that's very, very much true, because so much can happen in a child's life or an elderly's life. 1 minute they're in A&E, 1 minute you get a call from school while you're in a business school. Someone has to drop something. And Gabor Mate, who's a Hungarian psychologist, said it's actually the hardest time in history to be a woman, because most of us have moved away from that nucleus family or from the extended family, where really you did have the village, you had the grandparents, the aunts, the uncles, etc., to step in, and now we're more kind of isolated families trying to figure it all out ourselves. So I think it is actually one of the hardest times to be a woman. And why this matters to me is, well, I am a woman who's trying to flourish in my own career, but if you just step back and look at the stats, I mean, you've covered them brilliantly, but just maybe from another perspective, and the perspective that we've worked with Gaurav in the past, is if you give a woman a loan and you give a man a loan, it's very likely that the woman is going to repay on time, in less time, and whatever she's using that money for is probably going to be of benefit to society and her family. If you look at the stats on women founders, funds that have invested into women companies, they're doing phenomenally well, but yet it's very hard for women to kind of cross that bridge. So that's probably from a personal perspective. A professional perspective, at the foundation, we have a mission to increase the incomes of smallholder farmers, micro-entrepreneurs, urban transporters, and 50% of them to be women. And, just taking a step back, many of us in the development sector have programs or are designing things to increase the incomes of women. I have hardly ever heard anyone talk about care, myself included, who has hugely benefited from that, right? And when Gaurav told me about this panel, I was like, gosh, this is a universal topic that impacts every woman, regardless of race, religion, socioeconomic background, income. I mean, if you read Michelle Obama's first book, she talks about she brought her mum into the White House to look after her children, and that's related to the trust element, right? This impacts everyone, wherever you are, and it made me think that, you know, as a foundation, we've designed things that reduce the time burden for women. So, you know, cooking, for example, takes up a huge amount of women's time. In a lot of the markets that we work in India or in markets in Sub-Saharan Africa, women are collecting wood 3 hours, then they're cooking all 3 meals. And, you know, if you give them a clean cooking device, that can reduce their time burden by 2 to 3 hours. If labor-intensive processes are mechanized, that reduces time burden. But just taking a step back, if someone gave me a pressure cooker, and that's not going to unlock my economic potential, right? That's going to reduce some of my time burden. But what is fundamental and what is a true enabler is having care, access to affordable care, care that I trust, but not just one-dimensional. And it's embedded through numerous things, having policies, having a system that protects me as a woman in the workforce, and having a family and ecosystem that I can lean in on. So, yeah, I think a really, really important conversation, and thanks for having it.
Yeah, thank you, Mira. So I think this is also super diverse perspectives, but I want to move more. I mean, I think, as I said, it seems very obvious as a solution. So let me ask, the group again, if you had, what would you do as an individual or as an organization to address this issue? And I think if there's one thing you would want to do, what's the most important? Because all of you have mentioned various different things, but I think I'm trying to, we have I think next week we have a global care forum where I think UN Women is hosting this. We're trying to present and aggregate, I think, learnings from at least our experience in India, but also from the diverse experience from all of you, and want to present that back as, I think, one of the key things is to establish care as a human right, among other things, right? And obviously lots of questions on who will actually pay for it. I mean, we're looking at business models clearly, but it cannot always be a business model. It has to be a blended model. And so it would be interesting to get all of your, if I were to ask you in whatever sequence, I think we can go right to left, or in terms of if there's one thing you, as an individual or as your organization would want to do, what would that be? And second part of that question is, what would we expect others to be doing, right? I think these are the two questions I would pose to all of you. Rohini, मैं आपके पास आता हूँ, मैं translate करके. But actually, let's start with you, no? It's head. So अगर आपसे मैं पूछूं कि ये इस टॉपिक केयर के टॉपिक के बारे में आप अपने गांव में एक चीज़ हो जो कर सकती हैं, क्या करना चाहेंगी, और बाकी लोगों से क्या एक्सपेक्ट करेंगे?
और मतलब गांव के?
हाँ, गांव आप अपने आप क्या करना चाहेंगी ये चाइल्ड केयर प्रॉब्लम और एल्डरली केयर प्रॉब्लम सॉल्व करने के लिए? सेंटर तो आप कर रही हैं, उसके अलावा क्या करना चाहेंगी, और बाकी लोगों से क्या एक्सपेक्ट करेंगी?
गांव के लोगों ने हमें सपोर्ट करना चाहिए, तो गांव के लोगों से मैं एक्सेप्ट करूँगी. और मतलब मैं बच्चों के बारे में या विमेंस पूरा तो मैं ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा महिलाओं को जॉब प्रोवाइड करना, उनके पैरों पे खड़े रहना. जैसे कि मैं खुद यहाँ तक आई हूँ, वैसे मेरे हर गांव की महिलाएं खुद के पैरों पर खड़ी रहे और बिजनेस में तरक्की करे, यही मैं एक्सेप्ट कर रही हूँ.
और बाकी लोगों से
गांव के लोगों ने हमें जो भी हमने चालू किया है, तो पहले महिलाओं की खुद की तरक्की होगी तो समाज की भी होगी, और समाज की होगी तो बच्चों का एजुकेशन और हेल्थ, उसके ऊपर भी हम काम कर सकते हैं.
I just translate. I think she's just saying that if we increase women's employment or economic empowerment, this will happen by itself. Children, the outcome will move up, and the society will accept that is a good thing. So she's advocating that more opportunities and more progress will automatically lead to this. If there's an acceptance in society, I think that's the brief summary. Yeah, thank you, Rohini. Tabitha.
Can I cheat and have two?
Please.
Because I think this is something that we can't just give as a government problem, and we can't just give as a private sector problem. It has to be something that comes together. And I think from a government perspective, a really simple way, I say this, I think things are simple, I think we just make them very complicated. every government, whether it's a national or a local level, has some sort of growth plan for their region or the country. And in that, you'll be like, how are we going to attract workers? How are we going to attract business? Where are people going to live? How are they going to get around? How are they going to maybe even educate their children? And how are they going to look after themselves? So they, you know, the healthcare. In that, care for the elderly and care for children is never, ever broadly in there. So I say in every growth plan for a region or a country, it has to be as important as how are we going to educate our kids, bring investment in, and how are we going to, you know, look after our healthcare. So it has to be at that plan, because if it's at that level, it stops being an add-on, it stops being an expense, it starts being as important as where are we going to house workers. And then the private sector, we've had some brilliant examples here. And I think UN Women, what we're trying to encourage is exactly, you know, what we've got on this panel today. You know, at Dharma Life, we've got you actually investing in projects that are upskilling women, as we've been talking about, but also providing really quality childcare as well. So thank you again for that. And all of the organisations where you're talking about actually, you know, trusting your employees, in pushing paternity leave. So I think employees and corporate organisations and private sector can do two things. They can ensure their employees are looked after and cared and go beyond what is expected regionally. Because remember, these are human rights. This is not just doing what the minimum of the law in that country is. So let's make sure you're really spreading that across. And then, you know, also think about those organisations that have foundations that want to invest. Come to work with organisations like ours and on joint projects, work regionally to help women, because we have to think about the intersections of women, because women are not just one homogenous group. Someone growing up in rural India and someone growing up in Liverpool in the UK, very, very different experiences. So we can't have a one size fits all. But I think between private sector and government working together, we can make huge changes.
Thank you. Let me come to Elizabeth.
So first, I love the intersectionality part, because often, indeed, right? I mean, there are white women, there are black women, Asian women, or whatever color, and some minoritized groups face even double burden or even more burden, right? Including disabilities and so on. So I think that I love that, but this doesn't count as my number. But I think privately, really what I said before, right? Start with ourselves. So support your partner at home, number one. And you asked Gaurav before, right? Why are we not, you know, is the needle not moving so much? Because it's very, of course, comfortable also for the majority group to stick with the majority group and, you know, don't make any sacrifices in their either career or financially or whatever status. So support your partner at home, and also don't, challenge your own stereotypes, and encourage also in your friends or, you know, in your community, for the women, for example, to return to work early, and for the men to take parental leave, example, right? So let's challenge our judgment that we have that our stereotypes that we still have around those gender roles. That's number one personally. And organizationally, I think it's super important to really role model also taking parental leave as men as well. Be the role model that you want your employees also, how you want them to live or act, for example. Hire women, especially, or people after career break. So we mentioned the 96 million before, right? It's still, I think we're not doing a great job there yet, even though if you have maybe, you know, programs out there, I know that the implementation is much tougher than, you know, putting it out there for like PR purposes. So really have bias trainings for your recruiters, for hiring managers, and challenge or focus on people on a after career break especially. And then I think on also the country level, I think providing care is super important. There are still, I mean, again, it varies, right? The paid maternity or parental leave, but there are still too many situations, too many countries where there's nothing provided, maybe a few weeks, only a couple of weeks for either mothers or fathers, or maybe then 1 or 2 months, right? But what happens afterwards, especially if then maybe the woman is the main carer and or the main breadwinner, let's say, and the partner, maybe in that case, then man is not. So really, this is tremendous, and will, you know, especially if you have a certain standard of living as well, you will not have any income, and you will really need probably, I don't know, a lot of money, 15, maybe 20K or so, from your savings to invest in the first year if you want to stay at home. So these are my points.
Thank you, Mitzvahs. Lucy?
Well, first of all, I want to sort of echo what Tabitha said about making care like fundamental priority. I completely agree with that. I think that's, that would be amazing. But otherwise, for me, I have two, one professional, one personal. That's okay, sort of cheating a bit. Professionally, I think it's what I was, alluding to before, which is like, how do we use technology better to help us as humans focus on the things that matter most? And I think, in particular, like leveraging the opportunities for new types of work, new jobs, and with certain sort of digital AI skilling, but also about using technological solutions at home to create sort of more time to focus on your work and focus on the quality moments of childcare. So I think those, let's lean into that, absolutely, and those sort of quick wins especially, and embrace technology as it comes, like, the care bots, etc., where that's helpful. But I think on a personal level, I'm really, really determined for us to empower men to lean in to the family and to have the opportunities to embrace being a joint primary carer in the family home. And I know that's a sort of longer journey in some places, but I think that everyone will flourish in that opportunity. And I think men will be able to reap benefits, and in the process, women and children will as well.
Thank you.
Thanks. Echo your last point, Lucy. So I guess 3 points from me. First one, I would say no to being on an all-women panel, because I really think we need a diverse conversation with men at the table.
Absolutely.
Point on care that we didn't talk about was the mental load. So especially in the UK, we're certainly seeing men lean in to the physical load, pickups, childcare, etc. But the mental load sits mostly with women. And I was just telling a friend in the audience, I have decision fatigue, right? Everything is on the women. And the third thing, an onus and probably commitment that I will take back after this conversation is bringing the conversation of care into program design. There is millions, if not billions, of impact dollars going to increase incomes of women. And like I said, very few of them bring in the conversation of care. So there's a real risk that all of that impact dollars is not going to reach their target because we're not addressing the fundamental conversation.
Yeah. Thank you. No, I think it's just, it should be part of every program design, because it's without, you're just not enabling effectiveness of the program without considering it. Rohini, आपका एक point, last point.
वही कि बच्चों का एजुकेशन और महिलाओं को खुद के पैरों पे खड़ा रहने के लिए मैं सोच रही हूँ, लेकिन गांव वाले सपोर्ट तो करेंगे, मैं उनका विश्वास भी जीत लाऊंगी, लेकिन आप सब लोग मुझे हेल्प करोगे तब भी मैं कर सकती हूँ, क्योंकि मैं अकेले कुछ नहीं कर सकती. आप लोगों का जैसा सपोर्ट मुझे आज तक रहा है, वैसा ही सपोर्ट रहेगा तो मैं कर पाऊंगी.
Thank you, Rohini. She's just, I think, highlighting the fact that the support she's got through the global empowerment of such programs, that has to be scaled, and she's expecting that going forward. Thank you, Rohini. I think we're pretty much running out of time, but we've started a few minutes late, so I think now maybe time for questions from the audience and from the global stream. So if we could go around, maybe time for 2-3 questions.
Hi, okay. So I'm Nidhi. I've worked in LBS many years ago, married to a partner who's an LBS student, but also worked in the corporate sector for 18 years. And I've been through being a mother, working mother and everything. And I counted the men in the room. I think there are 18 or 19. And I was wondering what Felicit, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing the name wrong, said. Yeah, 2-3 calls for action, like support your partner, how can you do more? And I was wondering, can we talk more about it? Maybe a lot of men are already supporting women at home, but how many of you proudly say on social media, I washed the dishes today so my wife could be on an important meeting? Or XYZ, can we bring up that conversation a bit more? That will help make it normalized for other men. That's one. Secondly, I always wonder, evolutionary men were sent out to hunt. and women were with the community at home, cooking food, taking care of children. So how do we help men change that, build that mental muscle? Like, for example, if someone asks us to now care less for our children as women, we can't do that. So how can we ask men to care more for the children, care more for the elderly? How can we help them change that mental setup? How can we empower them there is my question, the panel.
Sorry, can I just jump in here? Because what you said, right, with the men were hunting and the women were collecting. Actually, did you know that there are biases? Or actually, it's not quite true. I don't know if you... Because there's some last research, and there's like, I think this German book, unfortunately, I'm not sure if it's, you're nodding, you might have seen similar ones, right? But it's, in German it's called Beklaute Frauen, I think stolen women. And they actually now discovered those graves and saw that the DNA of the people where they thought these are like the male leaders, they must be super important because many pregnants are around, and so they're all women. So, and also the hunter graves, I don't know, you know what I mean? Warrior graves. Actually, they also found many female bodies, so also women were warriors. So I think that's also interesting, right? So we think about the history in a certain way because then probably male scientists discover that because of their biases again, which actually now is not true, but I agree with you. We need to, I think, more encourage, right? Showing positive role models or encourage, the men to step up and help with the unpaid work at home, also mental health, or mental load, what you mentioned, right? Or household work, caring responsibilities. I think, speaking about personal stories, role modeling it really helps.
I think to your point, the fact that it is modern history where men have become the sort of the powerful, the leaders, the thing. It is sort of it's a man-made history. It's not always been like that. So there's been, as you said, history showing us something quite different. So it gives me hope that because we've created this, it isn't inherent in it. It's not in our DNA. There's a myth that women are natural carers and men are natural leaders. That's putting us into two very separate buckets. So I think there's I could talk all day on this subject because this is at the root of how we get gender equality. And it goes from everything from our advertising. So, no longer putting women selling washing up liquid and washing products, which has changed dramatically over the past few years. So that's one part.
Didn't ad, the share the load ad was one.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's also why we want care invested in and seen as a career. Because if you start seeing men working as carers in care homes, as nursery nurses, if you start seeing them in that, you start to shift men's perception of what it is, because that's all it is, it's a perception. There is nothing saying a man can't look after children, and there's nothing saying a man can't look after elderly people. It's a perception that we built up. The same way as that gendered violence is such a pernicious thing in the world today. It's completely man-made. So I am hugely confident. I am like glass overflowing, not half full, that we can change this. But it's also, I don't think we should start congratulating men for doing dishes. I think we should just, it's not a UN Women's stance, but we should normalise it in conversations. So men, when somebody in your friendship groups takes the mickey out of their friend for doing that, or saying, call them out. So men call each other out when you're saying, you're under the thumb and you're this and that. And that's the change you make, because women have got enough on our shoulders to carry. Men start calling each other out and lifting each other up.
Can I just add one more point? I think there is a transition happening. I think it's going to be varied by country, but at least in the UK and amongst my peer group, there's a shift in that most households actually just can't survive on one income. And it actually requires two people to work. That's a massive shift from what you were saying 30, 40 years ago, where it was quite normal to have a one household income. And I agree with all the points. I might say something controversial here. I think there's also an onus on women when the man is leaning in and sharing the load, maybe not to also be critical on, you didn't quite do it how I wanted, to be encouraging as well. Because sometimes when men lean in, they fear it's not good enough. So I think it's a two-way conversation, and I think at least in London or in the UK, it's not a choice. It's actually most households are a two-income household.
Yeah. Thank you. I think, I have one question in front.
I think that.
Actually, one more. Yes.
Yeah, the mic.
But then we come two more questions, I think. Please.
I'm Annie Pang. I'm a town planning consultant. So my objective in life is to create better lives for people, whether abroad or in the UK. I belong to the London Chamber of Commerce, and there is a big women in business group. I feel very sorry for men because they get a lot of man bashing, and I'm almost embarrassed sometimes because it's time that we see each other as equals, and we deserve the respect as women, but we also should respect the role of men in a balanced business and work life. And I certainly didn't get to where I am without a few men helping us. Just on the point of AI, I'm very well aware that AI is actually leaving a lot of perhaps more elderly people behind. And that is being speeded up a lot more because of AI. And everybody expects that everybody should be able to use a mobile phone or pick up on AI. And I think perhaps, is there a possibility of actually engaging the group of people that we're trying to help, especially with the elderly, and actually finding out how they are coping? Because I suspect, even in England and certainly in other developed countries, that's actually not true. Those people are feeling more left behind. A very simple example is that with banks closing, why are we closing banks? It's because we think that technology is taking over, so we do not need it. Actually, a lot of people are feeling even more left out than before. So I'm not sure whether we are actually improving society in that sense. Thank you.
I can answer that one. First of all, I agree with you. Let's not bash men. Let's empower men to lean into the great opportunities to be carers too and recognise that. On the AI stuff, I totally agree. As I said, my philosophy about technology is like, let's utilise technology to focus on having the best human experiences. I think with an interesting point that you raise about elderly care, which I think, and certainly on a personal experience, I'm in that sandwich generation of looking after an elderly mother and 2 young children, and it's really, really hard. And I think what children can't always do is care for themselves because they're children, and then we have responsibilities to make sure they're cared for within, and encourage independence, but within, they're not adults. Whereas what I guess is wonderful, if we can use technology and other things to help elderly people care for themselves and not feel disempowered by the world around them and the challenges of aging. So one of the things we did at Google, and I led the digital skills program in the UK, is whilst we were also trying to help people, get new skills, and especially to support women into new careers and jobs that might be, economically empowering and flexible, we actually had a big program to support elderly people, exactly for what you said, to take more responsibility for their own evolving needs as, society and technology was rapidly changing. As banking is a very good example. But also they were often, taken advantage of in terms of scams and fraud. And it was like, how do we educate humans? I don't think technology, one of the sort of risks of everything being done, AI can actually help. Some people think can help with loneliness because you can talk to, chatbots and LLMs and have a conversation, but it's not a human. And so we can never say that technology replaces the need for human relationships. It can replace human tasks. So I think we just have to be careful about empowering elderly people to give more care to themselves whilst making sure that the channels of human contact and relationships are still there.
Thank you, Lucy. I think that was right.
I just wanted to come back to you on the bashing men, because never in the history of making change is bashing a powerful group ever made a change. It doesn't work because you alienate them, you push them into it. But let's be really careful about when we're saying bashing, when we're pointing out facts. So there's a real difference there. There is a fact that women have a disadvantage when it comes to care in society. But that doesn't mean we can't engage men in the conversation. And the big, powerful change is when you show them what's in it for them. But you have to, I think, start with facts here as well, because too often, you know, when women point this out, it's like, oh, well, you're blaming men. Well, we're not. We're just pointing out the facts. We want to engage men in those conversations and see how they can be part of the solution. And whatever we're talking about, whether it's ending gender violence, whether it's sorting this care issue out, it's engaging men in the conversation. But we do have to start with facts, because we've all grown up in a world that has, everyone in this room, that has made this normal. This is just normal for men and women's roles. And so many men want to break out of this, but don't quite know how. So I think all of us in this room is just to sort of like gently point them in those directions and have those like difficult conversations.
Thank you. I think we are pretty much done. I think there's one more question online, and I think, yeah, one more in front. I think there was one.
Yeah. I'm just going to speak on behalf of the Zoomies and take. But I'm going to pair it with another question. So someone said, in Kerala, there's a matriarchal community that empowers women. And they've talked about how that essentially leads to better education, more progress, and kind of an evolved kind of economic system. So I guess my question for the panel here, based off of what someone's put there, is what lessons can Western women and like kind of the care spaces that you're talking about learn from these communities? Because often when we look, we're looking from a Western lens in instead of that lens out, essentially. What can we learn from the global South? Or I feel like often that lens is, we never look at it from the other way. We're always kind of looking in, essentially thinking we have the solutions. So I just wondered what that panel could offer anything.
Just really quickly, I think the example you give shows that this is not the norm. This is what we're talking about today. But what has happened is, thanks to colonialisation, we have taken those views and we have pushed them across too many countries. So it has become the norm in too many countries. So I think exactly those examples point to your point. I mean, this doesn't have to be this way. So learn from them. How do those societies work? How does the economy work? And take those examples. And that's what we do at UN Women. We work with grassroots organisations across the world to take that best practice and roll it out.
Thank you. I think, yeah, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful sessions. And just one question regarding the technology and the economic impact in India, as we saw with the case of honey making, is that I think changing the economic circumstance, for example, not only the cultural factor or religious factor, but changing the whole economic circumstance. For example, what we see in the UK is that we need a double income. So that changes the whole landscape of how men and women are encouraged to more engage in the home care and everything else. But I just want to understand that whether how the technology will be able to change the game in a way. Because economically, the unit price of men's labor and women's labor, it's been there for thousands of the years. But now with the technology and the economic circumstances are really changing that dynamic. And I want to have a quick advice from the panel about that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. रोहिणी, आपके लिए सवाल है कि टेक्नोलॉजी के आने से ये जो चेंज आ रहा है, जो बहुत ज़्यादा महिला काम कर रही हैं, वो कैसे मतलब हेल्पफुल हुआ है? टेक्नोलॉजी की वजह से क्या हुआ है, क्या हो सकता है?
टेक्नोलॉजी आ रहा है, जब रूरल एरिया रहता है तो उसमें कोई भी इंफॉर्मेशन नहीं पूछती, जैसे कि गवर्नमेंट का कोई स्कीम आ गया, वो भी गांव तक नहीं आता है. तो टेक्नोलॉजी की वजह से ये सब फास्टली गांव में आ सकता है और हम लोग खुद में और हमारे बिजनेस में बदलाव कर सकते हैं.
महिला के लिए क्या है उसमें, क्या होना चाहिए?
महिलाओं के लिए तो
आप मतलब
हाँ, महिलाओं के लिए तो ट्रेनिंग ज़रूरी है. जैसे कि गांव में जो भी हम कुछ गांव का ही क्या बोलते हैं, गांव में ही जो हमें रॉ मटेरियल मिलेगा उसमें से ही कुछ बनाने का टेक्नोलॉजी वगैरह ट्रेनिंग ऐसा गांव में रहेगा तो अच्छा रहेगा.
I mean, the answer is that obviously technology has really, I think, is a leapfrogging process for them, I think. And I mean, that's what I would interpret it, I think. And she's asking for, I mean, she finds it I think in her case, it's a fast track, right? Because doesn't have an educational degree. She just leapfrogged with the technology journey and is able to match and balance and compete with other businesses outside her village. So it increases reach, it democratizes the educational journey, I think the access to information, and it also so it does it at a much faster pace, real time. I think that's where, as you said, it's actually just echoing your point that it is a tool to quicken that process, only if that access is given equitably, right? Whether it's across age group or gender, right? I mean, that I think to the earlier point, but just inferring and summarizing. I'm sorry, I have to add to that. It's hard to translate that point, but yeah. Anyone else? I think otherwise.
I was just going to say, to your point, a lot of women, especially in rural areas, so care is one thing, but they're also restricted by access to transportation. So rural logistics is really, really expensive. And what technology does is provide economic opportunities from home as well. Excellent. Having access to the internet, what Internet Sati has done. I mean, who would have thought that she'd go into beekeeping, right? And having looked at, information and things like that, the gig economy has come about, so giving you that flexible work. If you're a farmer, you can understand whether my crop has gone bad and why without having to go to the nearest village, right? So it's all coming to you, and allowing you to do different tasks, whether that's textiles, sewing, etc., from home.
And to take the sort of different angle about sort of new jobs, as they don't exist yet. So men and women are just as likely to be able to be trained and skilled in them. In countries like the UK and US, we still see huge wage disparity and salary disparities for doing the same job between men and women. And that's often because there's entrenched attitudes about men's fit for certain jobs, etc. So I think as new technologies change the way we do jobs, but also what jobs exist across the world, that there'll be more and more opportunities for that sort of income equality.
Thank you. I think on that note, I think we've run over time, so I will save my summary. I think we'll summarize this for the forum and share it with everyone, I think, on the mail group.
We'll use technology to do that.
I think we can use ChatGPT to understand.
Yeah.
But really, thank you. Thanks to all of you. Thank you for your time. And yeah, for also the audience, everyone being here and online. So really appreciate it. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And in addition, on behalf of London Business School and the Wheeler Institute, I want to say thanks to Gaurav for envisioning this, bringing us all together. We're here in large part because of you. And thank you all. Several of you mentioned this seems like a fundamental issue. And yet, when we first envisioned this and, put it out there, it didn't seem like it was resonating in quite the same way. And perhaps it's the language we use, perhaps it's the recognition, perhaps we're just early in telling the story the right way. So I'm so grateful to so many of you not just came, but stayed. It's a bit of a marathon set of sessions here. So thank you for staying. And thank you each for being part of our community. I took away so many memorable phrases, ideas from the entire discussion today. Rohini, बहुत दूर से आप आए हैं, बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद आपको. And so from so many distant places, I'm actually from the state that Miriam was referring to originally, Kerala, which does have a community that is matriarchal. I must say, part of my sort of strong determination to engage in this area of gender parity more generally was because of the unfairness that I saw growing up in Kerala. So if that's as good as it gets, boy, we have a long way to go. I don't know, there are plenty of positive and negative lessons to be learned from Kerala. I hope I didn't, the Zoom crowd, I hope there are not too many Keralites on the ground. I may have made myself unpopular in my home state. But what I took away was this sense of hope. I loved the phrase you used of not just glass half full, but overflowing. So with that wonderful sentiment in mind and hope, thank you again, and thank you all for coming. And please come back, tell a friend. If you're not already on the Wheeler Institute newsletter, please share the newsletter. I will end with a sense of gratitude to some team members here at the Wheeler Institute. Bushra, our head of events and everything else, and Mariam out there, who is in our communications, heads our communications team at the Wheeler Institute, and Tiago, who orchestrates everything on our behalf. They've been working really hard. They barely got any sleep last night. I know this because they were at our home for dinner. So thank you so much for all your work, and stay in touch.